Hi, this is Dennis Dalton, Safety Officer, and this is the safety meeting briefing for May 30th, 2023. I was asked by a couple instructors, and I appreciate the input, to maybe do a mountain flying safety meeting, since at this time of year there's a lot of interest in people wanting to get a mountain checkout, and so I thought that's what I would do. Um, they also mentioned to me, that they could use this as part of the ground school if they wanted to, because you do need to sit down with people, and this could be a good augmented uh, source of information. Um, and from the SOPs, I'll just read this. All pilots are required to have a mountain checkout flight and a mountain ground school prior to any flights over or near a mountainous area, including all flights west of I-25. Ground training may be formal, which they do mention could be something from AOPA, or it could be this presentation, or given on a one-on-one basis by a Rocky Mountain Flight Training Center instructor. There will be a written test that will be administered before you can be signed off in your logbook to rent a plane to fly in the mountains. This safety briefing covers subject areas that are on the written test. The single engine aircraft suitable for mountain flying from the club, also the multi-engine aircraft as well. But in the single engine category, you have the B, we have 1B and the Cs. They have a maximum altitude of 17,000 feet based on density altitude, of course, and for performance levels, and the 182 is 18,000 feet. One of the first things I wanted to address was flight planning. So there's a few things I wanted to say about that. This is the Colorado Department of Transportation chart, which is they always say VFR reference only. But what's different about this that you won't get on ForeFlight, I don't think. I can't remember if that's on mine or not, but is the mountain passes. Now what you have here is the Colorado Springs area here, and the typical area that we are concerned with when we go to Lake County over here as part of the mountain checkout. Now it can be a round robin that goes down here off the chart to another airport and back and what have you, but I just copied this area just to highlight a couple things. One of the things here that these charts are different for is these little diamonds, which are routes, suggested VFR routes through the mountains based on altitude and probably familiarity with ground reference maneuvers, as well as lined up with the passes. You'll notice this one going around up 24 into Woodland Park and goes over, I think this is Highway 24. You can't see it too well on this map. From Florissant, you can see through here, and it goes over the Wilkerson Pass right here to over here to Hartselle. You can see Hartselle right here. And it says in the mountains that you should maintain 2,000 feet AGL. You'll notice here the Florissant Fossil Beds National Monument, and this icon here means 2,000 feet AGL over this area. So if your goal was to go to Lake County from here, of course you have whatever options that you work on with your instructor, but what this map is giving you is some more preferred routes that have visual references, as well as going through the passes. Here's Trout Creek Pass right here, and then coming up the valley to Lake County. Now, one other alternative, depending on your instructor and what the weather and the winds and what people are doing, is going through Weston here. Weston is a very close when you're coming out of the other end of this, getting down to the airport, since Weston is 12,157 feet, although you know you need to be 2,000 feet above that. And you will notice here the Buffalo Peaks Wilderness Area is really part of Weston Pass. It's right on the edge there, depending on which map you look at. And you can see these little dots in here. So that's a 2,000 foot away from above clearance. So Weston is a little more of a challenge and can't be something you should be going over, contrary to the SOPs or to the suggested altitudes above wilderness areas. So the first thing is that you do need to make a flight plan. That's stressed more than once during this video. I mean, as far as a checkout goes, that depends on the instructor. I would say that an FAA flight plan is highly encouraged, and we will touch on this a couple more times in this safety briefing, but you know, an Aero Club route of flight paperwork, which you do before you leave, can be sufficient for short trips returning to KCOS if a detailed route is written in and adhered to, which should be, so people can know where you are, where you're going. And of course, you would want to plan your trip ahead of time, which we'll talk about, along routes that include populated areas and well-known passes, or over valleys whenever possible. GPS will not do that. If you can see this one's a little smaller, but this is the regular VFR sectional map. Of course, these white lines are Class Charlie outlines for Colorado Springs over here. But you can see right here where my highlighter is, and that's where the Wilkerson Pass is. And so, you know, the CDOT has these books that we have laying around here if you'd like to pick up one. This is the telecommunications microwave site, which is just to the northeast, about 1.5 miles of the pass. So that would mean the pass is right over here. And these visual references are very helpful for first timers, and to give yourself some checkpoints of where you are and where you're going. And of course, the Highway 24 also goes over the pass, which you can't see in this picture. And you notice these section altitudes, which means that you can't see the edges. The edge of this section's right here. So this box here is 12.1. This box here, because of Pikes Peak, would be 14.5 is the highest point in that quadrant. Okay, so I just said going over valleys. Well, depends on the valley, depends on which way you're going, and depends on how high you are, but over valleys, not in them whenever possible, but maybe that should be more clarified to mean a small valley, which is more like a canyon. A dead-end valley may also have a rising floor. If flying below peaks, fly to one side, not the middle. That's a fairly generic approach, but I have a couple illustrations here that maybe we can go over a little briefly here. First of all, the best path to fly on this picture here through a canyon or a valley is on the updraft side if the canyon is sloped. Updraft side is this word here, which means if the air is coming this way, it's going to come down around in here, and once it gets down, it's got to go back out. So they're saying flying from high end to low end, or obtain an altitude before flying toward the higher elevation end. So if you have a river or a road going through here, it's probably not a dead end. If you could imagine, this would be Florissant back here where my highlighter is, and this would be Colorado Springs, for instance, you would be flying downhill. So that would be good. That's a lot better than flying this way and flying uphill, because then you know you have rising terrain, and you have downdrafts on this side. So it isn't like driving a car. You don't want to be over on this side. If you look over in this picture, you certainly don't want to be in the middle. So you'd want to be over here to give you some help climbing over the ridge. Now we've got some other discussions about, well, when they come up this side, it's going to come down this side again. That's true. So you have a lot of considerations, and knowing where the wind is coming from is not always easy to tell. It's just getting in there and getting a feel for it once you know when the general flow is. Looking at the winds at altitude, especially 500 millibars, which is 18,000 feet, over the mountainous area the day you're flying can be very helpful. If I see a lot of real tight lines, or I see some yellow and magenta on the wind chart on the weather website, and that stuff's 35 to 40, 45. It's not really a good idea to be doing that, because that's going to affect a lot of this up here at that 18,000 foot, 500 millibar line. Okay, so let's talk about this a little more. These are probably the two heaviest slides, I guess, that I have with all this information. So this en route flying, you want to plan a definite altitude to be flown on each segment of the flight, first of all, by consulting the sectional chart. Now that you really need to adhere to that and not just be flying along just at whatever altitude you want. I mean, you really need to pick altitudes that are 2,000 feet above the rising terrain, depending on which direction you're going and what your goal is. A movement, from one ridge line to another may be necessary in climbing toward a pass. Some zigzagging along a ridge line you're following may be needed to remain in the best updraft along the ridge. Now, that's also a difficult call. I mean, in here, the standard question and answer is, well, you cross a ridge here at a 45-degree angle. Well, you see this little 45 here, so they mean, oh, you want to cross this ridge here, so you don't want to fly straight across it, because you'll need to make a 180 if you need to get away from it. So if you take it at a 45, then a 90 will take you directly away from it, which is what they're illustrating right here. Now, that may be not the way to go to get over here. You may have to come in from this side, again, depending on where the wind's coming from. So if we look at this this one says approach the ridge at a 45. A safe altitude is 2,000 feet over the ridge. Winds aloft determine the ridge clearance. 500 feet may be an adequate margin with light winds and stable air, but not according to our SOPs, and I would not recommend it. And so here we go. There's one thing, I think the most obvious thing here is it's very convenient to have the wind perpendicular to the hills in the illustrations, just to tell you what would happen. So you have a 10 knot at altitude. Well, if these are 14,000 foot peaks, you mean you got 10 knots at 16,000 feet, and probably 500 millibars might be what, 10, 12, 15 knots? That's a good day. When it gets down here, it's not. So that's why I say looking at the winds aloft at 500 millibars when you're going in here is my idea of a good time. One thing they don't show, okay, so what you're seeing in here is, oh, looks like, boy, this is called the wind side, this is called the lee side. So the wind is always going to go up if it's coming from the west, which it mostly is. West, northwest, southwest. That's what makes these complicated, depending on which way you're going. That's why you have to have very specific headings figured out and altitudes figured out when going somewhere in the mountains. And then you can make your corrections accordingly and keep a big picture in your head. So this should be devoid of turbulence in here and in here, which is good. What they don't show in here is compression. The Venturi effect of air going over the top of these peaks can increase that 50 to 100%, which means a 10 knot wind up here could be 15 to 20 right here. 15 to 20 right here could make this a little better, even. Could make you get some little action right here. It's certainly going to be faster, just going over the top of the ridge, quite a headwind going one way, and then quite a ride coming back. And then you're going to get all this predictable downdraft. Over 20 knots, you're going to end up with 35 or 40 right here. Plus, you're going to get a lot more turbulence here. Now, as one illustration, and I'm not going to read this one down here. One other illustration about this is these rotor clouds behind my head. If you know, at Fort Victor 1, which is Spanish Peaks, if this was La Vida Pass, for instance, Spanish Peaks is 25 miles away. And there's been more than one day where it's blowing 10, right, at the field. You get up above pattern altitude, let's say 7,500 feet to 8,000 feet, and you're going to get a lot of these crazy black arrows that do these things. You're going to get some wind shear and a lot of bumps, sometimes over Green Mountain, which is about 10 miles to the north. Well, not the mountain itself, but where it crosses I-25, where the windmills are. That can flip you over, or give you a nice ride, and obviously so, because what's over on this side from Green Mountain right there in Mosca Pass is the sand dunes. And why are they there? Because of all that wind. So the wind is a very important factor. So this is something with your instructor that you experiment with and talk about when you're there in the process of going somewhere, so that you can see how the wind affects different areas depending on your approach to do something, although you do need a healthy respect for these things. You know, going through here is going to have something going on unless the wind's coming this way, but it never is going to be totally perpendicular or parallel to where you're flying. So that's what makes this a learning experience, as long as you are aware of what is happening. So if you're going to go, you're probably going to land at a mountain airport. So if you do, now you have, if you're just going to go fly in there and come back, Colorado Springs, just you know, for a little experience or something, that's great. But otherwise, you've got to deal with density, altitude, temperature, runway length, and general aircraft performance. You must consider those in detail. And remember also, you have to take off sooner or later. So not only landing, but departure. Just one aside to that is true airspeed. I'm throwing that in here, is 2% per 1,000 feet. So what that means is, you know, you get to the out in the mountainous areas and you say, well, I should land faster. No, you use the same speeds, indicated airspeeds that you use in Kansas, Nebraska, or Colorado Springs, or here. The problem is the true airspeed increases 2% for every 1,000 feet. So if you're here in the Colorado Springs, 6,000 feet, and you want to land at Leadville, which is Lake County, that's 9984 or something like that. What's it say here? Yeah, probably something like that. 9934 it says. Well, you got almost 4,000 feet. So 2% for 1,000 feet, so that's 8% increase in the speed over the ground. So if you're landing at 90, you're landing at, what can you land a C at? 80. You can land it at 80. No flaps, 80, 85. So you're adding, it's going to be over the runway as if you were doing 90, 88, or something like that. So it's going to take more runway to stop it, and more runway to take off because the air is thinner. So that's just an awareness. You notice there's a lot of different information you can get off the CDOT here, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I think if I start out here, you have runway 16 and 34, which is here. Obviously, this is going to the south. We're looking to the south. H1 is the heliport. And so these are all the lengths and surfaces and all that stuff you got in here. And gives you Unicom, lights, weather, ATIS, approach departure 119.85. What's that? That's Denver. I'll talk about that real briefly towards the end, as in flight following or something else that you might want to do. This gives you surfaces, bulk oxygen, none, no oxygen. How about fuel? Oh, they say they got fuel. Okay, well, that's something we'll talk about also. Well, one thing yet, here's Denver Center. This is the approach plate for 16, our nav approach. And those of you that I don't, want to, this is not an IFR situation here, but these things have quite a bit of information in them. A couple things that I would point out. I just wanted to say Denver Center, and that's where they get that 119.85 right here. Back in the day, they didn't have very good transmission, and a lot of these, these would be VOR approaches. I never had one to this one, and they'd stack you up out there, and then once they got you down a certain distance, they had to close off the field because you were the only guy, because they couldn't talk to you anymore until you got on the ground, called them. Anyway, so much for that. There's other things I'll say about this later. This has a lot of good information in it, though, but I just wanted to point that out. So let's say you have to land or take off, and one of the things that is the most concern is density altitude. But one of the things you need to deal with is understanding how to get to that. And the altimeter HG value, a density altitude problem requires that you use the altimeter to find the pressure altitude at 2992, which is easy to do. You set it to 2992 and you look in the Colesman window and you look at the altitude altimeter and see what it is. There's a couple things on ForeFlight you can use and a lot of other stuff. But that's probably the easiest and most direct. Just don't forget to put it back where it was. Or use your electronic device, as I said, or a chart as the one on the right. Not all charts are going to go up this high, because who's going up to 15,000 feet? Well, let's look at just a simple problem here, and it looks like my circle just barely caught what I wanted in here. The altimeter HG value is aligned with a positive or negative value that is applied to your field elevation. Finding the temperature on the bottom, followed by straight up to the new field elevation on the diagonal line, then horizontally to the left to read the density altitude. So let's say it's usually going to be around 70 degrees by the time you get to Lake County, which is, I think, about 21 centigrade, which is right here on the temperature. Okay. The first thing that you're going to need, though, is you need to have the altimeter setting and what it is. So if you and I don't have anything in the 30s here, it looks like 2992, which is 0, is right here. So in all fairness, the problem that you're given in the book in the mountain test is going to be lower than standard, because anything lower than standard, you're going to have to add that number. You see it's positive to the field elevation. So if the field elevation is 9984 for Leadville, and your altimeter is 29.0, you got to add 863 feet to 9984. So you're almost at, so you're over 10,000 feet, 10,500 feet, and let's say the temperature is 70. So you take 70 and go up to here's 10, and here's 11. So 10.5 would be a diagonal line right in the middle here. So a diagonal line right in the middle, which is right above this line of 21C, is right here. From there, you would go straight over to the left and get a density altitude of approximately 13.5. Okay, so that's how you would use that. You need to have a chart if you aren't sitting in the airplane with your altimeter that has a Colsman window. Okay, so you notice here, this takeoff distance here, first of all, is off of the POH for the 182, 2696 Charlie. Secondly is it's not the gross weight, which I believe is 31 maybe in that plane. I can't remember. It's a separate chart. So, and this is short field, I know. But, so we got the weights here, which are way below gross, which is what you should be when flying in the mountains. You'll notice that it's the pressure altitude, though, not density altitude that they're using. So pressure altitudes only go up to 8,000. So you still need to know what the density altitude is, right? But the pressure altitude here, if you notice, and 20C was about where we were in that other example, which is about 70 degrees or 68. And you notice a ground roll at 2,800 pounds, 670 at 8,000 feet, it about doubles. So you're going to be landing at the pressure altitude. You're going to be landing what? Another 2,000-3,000 feet higher than that. So what do you do with this? Well, that's something you talk about your instructor with. You need to, some of these newer ones will go higher. You can interpolate between these, whatever these progressions are between 6 and 7 and 7 and 8. You could maybe approximately assume they might go that same way for 9 and 10. So that's, again, this is not about that. It's about the general ideas of what needs to be discussed and how things you need to be concerned about when flying in the mountains. Other points to ponder here, effects on performance. Cold air, as we all know, is heavy and dense, providing more lift and more power. It can be cold up high, can be cold down low. So that's just one, that doesn't fix everything. It just means that's one item. Altitude. Higher the altitude, the less dense the air. Yeah, that's true. Also, though, it gets colder up there. But you have to figure that out. You have to take everything into account. Temperatures aloft. Warm air. Heated air expands. Heated air is less dense. Yes, if it's hot out, if it's above 70 degrees, not a good idea. You notice how these numbers, when they go up, 20C, 30C, you see how the ground roll gets longer. You're adding another 100, well, not 100, you're adding 50 feet right here. So, and humidity, which isn't talked about too much, but water vapor weighs approximately 5/8 as much, or less, a little more than half, as an equal amount of dry air. Water molecules are less dense than air. So, if it's humid, the air is less dense. Hot air molecules, hot air is also less dense, but also the molecules hold more water vapor. So that makes matters worse, is what it says back there. So if it's hot and it's humid, not a good idea. Values of 25% up to 50 should be used in all performance values when flying in the mountains based on all of these situations. Fortunately, humidity doesn't always go with altitude normally. So most of the time, this is not as big of a concern, but certainly flying back east where, you don't have an altitude problem, you do have this problem. So I guess it's just one thing or the other. Some things about fuel. Do plan the fuel load to arrive at the destination with a minimum 1 hour fuel reserve. Strong winds or disabled aircraft on the runway may require diversion to an alternate. Self-serve fuel may or may not be available. Check ahead the day of departure. Make sure you check your aircraft before you leave visually and know what your where you're going and how much you need a better fuel reserve. Adjust mixture every 2,000 feet when climbing. It's not always thought about very much, but you do a lot of climbing in the mountains, and you just don't go out east to the practice area and hang around at 8,000 feet. You're going to be up at 12, 10, 11, 12. So you have to keep adjusting the mixture. Climb at best rate. It is recommended after run-up, but just before departure, advance the throttle to full power and reeling the mixture as appropriate for the engine being operated. What you do at the run-up area may or may not work at that kind of altitude. And it is always a good idea to check the mixture when you're at higher altitudes at full power just before takeoff. More points to ponder on visibility. The horizon is the base of a mountain, approximately 5 to 6 miles away. I say approximately 5 to 6, generally considered 5, but judging distances should be something that you should discuss with your instructor when operating, when it isn't flat and you don't have 1 mile road intersections to measure, because nothing's straight in the mountains. So you guessing what 5 might be, but you don't want to be looking at the mountain itself, because that is definitely not the horizon, and you'll be climbing all the time. On survival equipment, typical things, water signal mirror, extra clothing, and whistle. The list can go on, matches and whatever else. But we don't have to worry about people wearing shorts here, because this is a military flight school, but people do wear shorts, and not always in the summertime climbing out of a plane. I've seen them. Make sure you understand what type of VLT is in the aircraft and how to activate it. That is important, because you rarely do that. I mean, it's not something that's done on every flight. I believe these all have 406s in them now. You should know that and know how to activate that. On CGs, load should be no greater than 90% of gross, which is why I gave you examples that were under that. Oxygen, recommended above 10, in my opinion. Required anytime 30 minutes over 12. I'm pretty sure that's 12. It could be 12.5, but it doesn't, anyway. And living in Colorado doesn't mean you're used to less oxygen than a flat lander, is what that says. There are many factors to consider, although it is probably true for a percentage of the people, not everyone. Some final thoughts, finally. Getting a complete weather briefing, including pilot reports for your proposed route. Make note of the winds aloft, altimeter settings, surface winds, and NOTAMs for all en route airports and destinations. Consult the POH for takeoff, climb, and ceiling capabilities of the aircraft. When calculated climb rates are below 200 feet per nautical mile, do not depart, is what that says. Now, for most private pilots, you probably don't run into that too much, but this is from the one of the departures from runway 16 that I showed you the approach plate for. This is the standard minimum climb of 396 feet per nautical mile to 13,000. If you're going to depart IFR from that airport. So VFR, that last comment was half that. Also notice this Lake County takeoff minimums, obstacle departure procedures for runway 16. I think this is the This is the Lozul departure here, which gives you this one. Davy's going to give you the other. And I don't know what the altitude was on that for this. Anyway, but there are quite a bit of poles, trees, transmission lines and poles, and more than, these things become quite an issue if you're leaving Lake County, after 12 noon in the middle of the summer, and it's 75 degrees out. It's climb rates are not that good. You can get off the ground, but climbing is another thing. Okay, so that completes the presentation, and I hope that was helpful. Thanks, Mr. Dennis Dalton, Safety Officer.